went fairly smoothly, so hopefully the rest will be the same.
Piece of cake.
Tim, would you like to do the introductions or would you like me to?
I can do it.
Okay, great.
Do you want to manage the chat or do you want me to?
I'll manage the chat for you.
Okay.
I've got it open. We're actually live, so we can get
Okay.
started whenever you want.
Okay, welcome again, everybody, to the first of the concurrent sessions. This one is very important to me and hopefully to you. It is about implementation of the Geospatial Data Act with Ken Schaefer. Ken is the Deputy Executive Director for the Federal Geographic Data Committee, which is administered by the USGS. Ken is no stranger to North Carolina. He spent many years here as part of the GIS community, played important roles along the way. And we're pleased to have him join us today to hopefully inform us as to what the Geospatial Data Act implementation means to North Carolina and to the GIS community. So Ken, welcome.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate it. Good morning, all. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump right in here with a presentation on the implementation of Geospatial Data Act and influencing national strategy. My understanding is there is a chat. You can pose questions and we'll take some that we have time for at the end. All right, so in a nutshell, FGDC. So the Geospatial Data Act of 2018, we referenced as the GDA, and I'll be making reference to the GDA throughout the presentation, so that's what I'm referring to. So it established in law the FGDC as an interagency committee within the Department of the Interior, who acts as the lead in the executive branch of government for the development, implementation, and review of policies, practices, and standards relating to geospatial data. And so this is codified in law. This is two branches of the federal government now recognizing the importance of geospatial and policy and management and its utilization. So the FGDC is an interagency body. It is historically known as the steering committee. It is chaired by the Secretary of the Interior, vice chaired by the Director of OMB. So these are cabinet level positions. And the members of the 30 plus agencies are assistant secretary or CIO level. It has supporting groups underneath it that provide recommendations and execute the implementation of the work. And those bodies are going to change a little bit in the near future. The law also codified the National Geospatial Advisory Committee. That's a little unusual. They provide advice and recommendations on policy and federal programs related to geospatial. And they are representative of many sectors, and you'll see that a little later on. Also, the FGDC Office of the Secretariat, which is where I'm located. We're a small staff. We provide support to the FGDC and its operations. We provide administrative, strategic planning, technical, and limited funding resources. The steering committee as an executive decision-making body also interacts with other interagency federal committees and councils, the most recent one being the Chief Data Officers Council, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But we also interact with the CIO Council and over the last few years, the Inspector General Council as well. So the Geospatial Data Act was passed as part of the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018. It codified in law the Office of Management and Budget Directive to the federal agencies on the establishment of the FGDC and management and use of geospatial information technology and policy. It also added a number of things that developed since the last iteration of the circular was released, specifically the advisory committee, the National Geospatial Advisory Committee, the portfolio management approach that is used by federal agencies for key geospatial data sets known as National Geospatial Data Assets. And so that's the structure of 18 data themes with over 170 data sets supporting them, when that is designed to be flexible and change over time. Put the Secretariat in law. It also put the Geo platform, which is a shared service that federal agencies are required to use to register their spatial data for access. And it added a number of agency responsibilities, very heavy on reporting. And while things like the NSDI strategic plan, which is something we've historically done, is part of that, it also includes biennial reports to Congress, biennial agency inspector general audits, and then a series of annual strategies and planning, not just for their NGDA assets, but for how the departments are utilizing geospatial in their mission. So it's a fairly significant lift. There are other laws that are impacting and altering the federal data landscape. And the primary one right now is the Evidence Act. And the Evidence Act actually has 3 titles, the second of which is the Open Government Data Act. And while there's a lot in these laws, a couple of the key points here are that it established the federal chief data officers at the departmental level for the federal agencies. So they are now part of the departmental leadership like the CIOs are. Additionally, it established the cross-government CDO Council. And so at that high-level executive decision making body, they now do coordination across on anything having to do with data. And this was just stood up in the last year, so they're still spinning their wheels up. But everything from privacy to machine learning, interoperability, all that stuff, these are issues that will go up to the CDO Council for federal-wide national policy. It also established public data as open data by default. So you start from the open data perspective. It established the federal data catalog in law, that's data.gov. And so all agencies are required to register their data there, and a series of data plans. I'm not going to go into the federal data strategy and the action plans, but there is a process here where the executive branch looks at the influencing elements and the priorities and then proposes action plans, including actions for the communities of practice like the FGDC. So in 2020, we participated, we had an action in the plan. It had multiple parts. Most of them were focused on advancing initiatives through the Geospatial Data Act. But specifically what I wanted to call out is we also established a formal liaison role between the FGDC and the Chief Data Officers Council. And so this ensures that there's coordination between the geospatial side of the house and the other statistical and other evidence-based data parts of the federal government, and will be the mechanism that can help to start establishing the foundation for how data with spatial features and data that don't have spatial features but have spatial attributes can start to become more closely linked and leveraged, which is potentially very powerful. We know it's not a technology issue. We will continue that ongoing collaboration in 21. We also have a pilot project to survey the federal agencies for identification of high value investment areas, potential high value investment areas, that if some funding becomes available to apply, where are some areas where if we apply that funding, it'll help us take some serious strides forward. And they could be related to implementing specific elements of the GDA or the NSDI. It could be related to particular data assets, partnership opportunities, or more mission-specific services or topics like elements of COVID-19 or a pandemic or the new executive order, which I'll touch on in a minute. So there are other laws also now that have called out FGDC with specific responsibilities. And of course, you heard Jeff talk this morning in the plenary about the broadband deployment in the state, and the Broadband Deployment Access and Technology Availability Act. It requires the FCC to consult with FGDC on the development of the national broadband map. The Digital Coast Act, which is led by Commerce, that also directs coordination on the implementation of that act with the FGDC, and the Department of Commerce and NOAA and Census and its other entities have been very active leaders in the FGDC for many years. So this is a very strong fit. Also, just at the beginning of January, the National Landslides Preparedness Act was passed, and this actually establishes a subcommittee of the NGAC, our advisory committee, that looks specifically at assessing trends and developments in 3D elevation in science and technology, and then requires reports on a regular basis with recommendations not only on the technology and the data, but also on the program itself. And this is fairly unusual to have a piece of legislation actually call out the establishment of a subcommittee of SACA. And less than a month ago, the executive order was passed on climate action plans, and it contains some very interesting language that directs the chair and vice chair of the FGDC to assess and provide to the task force, that's the National Climate Task Force, a report on the potential development of a consolidated federal geographic mapping service. And the thing to call out here is that it's public access and it's intended to assist federal, state, local, tribal governments. So this is not just a federal service entity. This is intended to be a national capability. And you'll see that theme with everything I'm presenting today. So I also want to touch on influencing, national geospatial strategy. A few things to keep in mind here. So all the things that I'm talking about here have directives to include the states and other constituent involvement. They're not just federal initiatives. The GDA itself was developed and passed through the influence of non-federal stakeholders and professional organizations. The federal agencies, even if it's a great idea, the federal agencies can't go to the legislative branch and make a pitch. And so that is something that has to come from the non-federal sectors. And so, the participation in professional groups, state coordinating bodies, and federal programs and activities are key ways to get involved in strategy. So I'm going to touch on a few specifically. So the NSDI strategic plan, this is a national plan, not a federal plan. And every time we develop a new plan, we try to make it more nationally focused and less federally focused. But this is a significantly collaborative development effort. And even though it goes through multiple federal reviews, the National Geospatial Advisory Committee, in this round, they had a subcommittee that focused on providing recommendations and advice on the plan's mission, vision, and principles, its draft development, and did stakeholder outreach to their own communities. Additionally, the FGDC had a couple of leaders forum where we pull in leaders of other professional organizations that are not necessarily represented at the time on the NGAC to get their direct input, and also goes through a public comment period. And while I'm not going to go into the goals and objectives, you can go to the website and pull it up and take a look at it. It is purposely designed to align with the other laws and policies, including best practices and international efforts like the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework from the United Nations. So I've mentioned the advisory committee a number of times, very active, produce great high quality products, and they really have an impact. It includes members from all the sectors that are part of an annual appointments process, and that current process actually closes. The current session closes next week. Currently, the NGAC is chaired by Mark Reichert with the Open Geospatial Consortium, and it's vice chaired by Sarah Battersby with Tableau Software, and this rotates on an annual or biannual basis depending on the membership lengths. So currently, Gary Thompson, NC Geodetic Survey represents, he's a state representative. He's also represents the professional surveyors community. And you can see in the past, we've had other representation from North Carolina. Zolt Nagy with CGIA at the time was a founding member. We also had David Wyatt, who represented the tribal community from the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. A number of the topics they're focused on now, you can see here with the Executive Order and Landslides Act, and we have to pay attention to the mandates in legislature. But there are also a number of other things that they're doing. A couple of them here are partnerships in the Landsat program, which has been very influential. Another way to get engaged is with the National Data Initiatives. So the National Address Database, which is led by DOT and Census, is pulling in data with collaboration from the states to develop a national database of the address asset. And while that program is not officially established, it, has a small amount of funding that's been helping it move forward. It's actually called out in the Broadband Mapping Act as a source of data to help validate address locations. The 3D elevation program, North Carolina has been a huge partner in this. This is an exemplar partnership and cost share with the USGS for national LiDAR coverage and other products. HIFELD, Homeland Infrastructure Foundation level data. So, Homeland Security and Preparedness Mission, this has been in place for the better part of 2 decades now, and it's still very active, and another place to, really get involved. And the National Broadband Mapping Act, which you heard talk about earlier today, where the FCC is working with the states and the service providers to advance those elements. And I can't stress enough the role of professional organizations in influencing policy and strategy. Broad constituency groups represent a huge cross-section of the community. And again, they can interact with federal legislators. So they have a power that is somewhat unique there. Key in providing subject matter expertise and business and operational requirements, and they're often representatives are sought to participate in federal and national coordination activities. And so what you see here is just a summation of the current professional organizations that are represented with the current membership of the NGAC. And right now, our membership is actually fairly low. We can have up to 30, and right now we only have 23, but you can see it's a pretty good cross-section. Want to take a minute to talk about some challenges, because there are a number of things when you're talking about influencing that, there are some walls, some barriers, some things that have to be worked around. So of course, we're going through an administration transition. That means new leadership, new priorities. And so we have to be flexible and adapt. It also means for the FGDC membership gaps, because a lot of our executive level folks are politicals, and so they will be migrating. The laws and executive orders have some significant new requirements, and I'm just going to throw this one out here from the GDA. It directs the FGDC to define roles and responsibilities not only for the Fed, but for all the sectors in collection, production, sharing, and use of geospatial information and the NSDI. That's a huge lift, and that's not something that can be done without considerable outreach and interaction. We have a pending release of OMB Circular A16. So this is guidance to the agencies on implementing the law. And we know that we're going to have FGDC governance changes and governance structure changes and memberships elements that we're going to have to address. We're still working very hard, and the agencies are working very hard on the first GDA report to Congress. And as soon as that finishes up, then the agency is going to have to start again a few months later on producing their next annual report. And then once that finishes up, they only have a couple of months before the second round of the Inspector General audits start. And so there's this very intense cycle of reporting that's going on right now. The implementation plan for the NSDI strategic plan was also supposed to start now. We're going to be pushing that off at least a few months, recognizing the requirements and the lift that are coming down with a lot of these new laws. And hopefully that's only going to be a few months. And so right now we're kind of experiencing this imbalance between the requirements and the resources to implement them, because none of this legislation or directives have come with new resources. And a lot of these laws focus heavily on reporting, and that's putting a lot of burden on the geospatial experts who are also trying to deliver services. And so again, here's another area where we need to come more into balance to make these things more effective. And of course, as all of us are dealing with, our operational environment is complicated with the worldwide pandemic. So the last thing I wanted to cover were opportunities for involvement more specifically. So track the development of the new laws and EOs. You can see there are a lot of touch points with the non-federal community and constituents. Again, the NGAC, very important. Their reports and recommendations do have a serious impact, and they are called out in new laws. The law itself, they provide input to the report that goes to Congress. Participate in federal initiatives and partnerships. A few examples that I've given earlier. Get involved in professional organizations. That is a great way to influence strategy and policy. And encourage them to nominate NGAC members as well. be responsive to federal inquiries when they come out. I'll give you one example. I was in a communication chain a couple of weeks ago where the Government Accountability Office was reaching out to a state representative to get their feedback on the Broadband Mapping Act. And this is not the first time that broadband mapping has been a federal directed activity. And they provided feedback, and they made some recommendations and observations on where some efficiencies might be found, and said, happy to talk more with you. And GIO immediately said, absolutely, we'd love to talk more with you. And GAO recommendations hold a lot of weight. Look for other opportunities. Geospatial Summit is coming out in May. NC Geodetic Survey, of course, a lot of the temporal-based the new datums, temporally based datums will be presented. Strategic plan, it's cyclical. Watch for it. Participation in public meetings are public meetings, and they're open, and you can call in. That's one thing the pandemic has done, is it's freed up a number of access to a number of meetings for more folks. FGDC, most of the FGDC meetings are public as well, and there are other special sessions on address database or parcels or whatever the topic of the day may be. Be a proponent within your organization. Continue to stress the importance and value of geospatial, and participate in the North Carolina Geographic Information Coordinating Council activities. That consolidated state approach is very impactful and beneficial. And with that, I'm going to tie it up here and say thank you for the opportunity to speak. And I think we have a couple minutes for some questions.
All right, thank you, Ken. So we have 2 questions so far, and I encourage you all to write your questions in the chat, and we'll pass those on to Ken. The first one is, does the Open Data Act mandate that data be distributed in open formats?
Open formats and interoperability are part of the, I'm not sure if it's part of the Open Data Act or part of the Evidence Act, which part of the act it is. But yes, the use of open formats, I don't think it excludes the use of non-open formats, because it still allows, while there are some mandates to make data available through the catalog and in the GDA through the platform, it doesn't exclude agencies from also making information available through existing services that might serve a particular community. So it's not looking to break anything that currently exists. It's looking to expand the availability and access.
So in reference to your challenges slide, how can North Carolina be a pilot for figuring out roles and responsibilities for a state to contribute to the NSDI with our GICC and well-established data sharing community?
So our initial thought in how we're going to approach that, and that ties into some elements of the NSDI strategic plan, that is certainly a topic that we will be bringing up with the NGAC. And so Gary Thompson, as a member of the NGAC, a longstanding member of the NGAC, he is a wonderful mechanism to make sure that those connections are taking place. And when there is a more solidified approach, then we will know more about how specifically states and other constituents can get involved and help influence that. But for now, I'd say the best way is to keep in tune with what the FGDC is doing and with the NGAC specifically.
Thank you. That is all the questions that we have right now. Tim, did you have any others before we wrap this up?
Well, North Carolina wants to be a player. As you know, Ken and I have talked about that over the past couple of years since the act was signed into law. So we stand ready to support, and hopefully you'll find a way to call on us at the appropriate time, and we'll stay engaged, certainly with Gary. Gary also serves on the GICC as the vice chair, so there's a great pathway there. Just thanks again for joining us, and we appreciate everything that you've had to say.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
So for everyone joining us, we have a second a next set of sessions starting immediately after this at 10:30. So please take a look at your agendas and see what you'd like to go to. There's also demos and vendors that you can visit as well. So thank you all for joining us today. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.